Welcome to the session on corporate social responsibility. We've got a fascinating panel for you. I'm Geoffrey, the moderator. I will speak just for a second or so to introduce things, put a framework in place, and then we'll turn things over to the panelists. I'll start off by asking them some questions. That'll sort of keep them busy for half an hour or so, and the rest of the time we'll have Q&A between the panelists and you guys in the audience. So the theme is collaboration in the delivery of corporate social responsibility. Just to give a little background on that, I mean, the theme is interesting because increasingly companies find that in order to be effective in the sort of CSR area, they need to collaborate with other entities. It could be other companies, it could be NGOs, or in some cases both of them. And just to use some real quick examples of that, the area of child labour, for example, which is a perennial problem in supply chain in a number of areas, many companies have found that the best solution to this involves collaboration with NGOs that are involved in child welfare and NGOs that are involved in education, because child labour is hard to manage, it's almost unavoidable. You don't want to simply fire the kids and kick them out on the street. You need to find some suitable long-term solution which considers their welfare, and that involves typically local social service organisations and local education organisations. And those are fields in which Western companies obviously have no particular expertise. So a number of Western companies worried about the child labour issue have tried to resolve some of the problems by collaboration with local NGOs in third world countries. Rather different spaces, for example, the Fair Labour Association. That's an association of garment-making companies, as I guess most of you probably know. And the issue there is to try and tackle problems that arise in the supply chain. Most garment manufacturers, most Western garment companies have overlapping supply chains. So there's entities out there that are in the supply chain for Gap and for many other companies as well. The Western companies find it hard to monitor their supply chains, so they've decided to collaborate in that process and work together in supply chain sort of monitoring and supervision through this entity called the Fair Labour Association. Another example of that type is the Equator Principles, which is where a group of banks decided to get together and sort of try to impose some kind of basic social and environmental standards as a quid pro quo for making loans, project finance type loans in developing countries. And again, it's an area where they rapidly recognise that if one bank acted on its own, the impact would be minimal. But if you get most major banks to agree to this strategy, to act in cohesion, it would have much more chance of having a real impact. So they're all just quick examples of situations where a company with really serious intentions in the CSR area has found it can't really go it alone, but has to work in collaboration with a range of other entities, either competitors or NGOs, or in some cases both competitors and NGOs. So all the companies we're going to be hearing from today are in some sense in this area. And from the panel, we'll be hearing from the panelists their particular experiences in this kind of area. Okay, so that's some background from me. So our first panelist is Payal from Standard Chartered. Standard Chartered is a major global bank, but actually not one of the more visible ones. It's one that a lot of people I find in the US haven't actually heard of, because although it's a major global bank, rather unusually, most of its business is in developing countries. Payal is head of public affairs for North America for Standard Chartered. And I'd like her to talk briefly to us about the following fact. Standard Chartered has a reputation, actually a good reputation, for being involved in good causes in developing countries where it operates. And I'd like to sort of look at that a little bit through a kind of business school lens and ask Payal how that fits into the bank's overall corporate strategy and whether the bank feels this is something which contributes to its bottom line. So, there's no real need to stand up. I just stand up and get their attention and quiet things down. The rest of the time we can keep the panel.
Professor hat on.
Exactly, that's right.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Jeff. The first thing I'd like to do, if I may, is just set a little bit of context, because I think it's important to understand who we are so you can understand how we think. As Jeff said, we're a bank. We're in some of the world's most dynamic markets. We're in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. And we've been in places like India and China for over 150 years. We're about 87,000 strong, and we have offices in about 70 countries. And because we've grown up in the emerging markets, our approach to business and our approach to risk is fundamentally different than a lot of other institutions. Very early on, we acknowledged that environmental and social challenges adversely impacted our markets most acutely, and so that there was a direct consequence to our business and to the communities and to our staff. So we recognized very early on how important and critical it was to address some of these issues and how important it was to embed it in our BAU. So that's who we are. How do we think? This leads me to our overarching philosophy, and that's we don't see sustainability as just a CSR kind of program. It's about our entire business model. And our aim is to promote sustainable growth in the real economy through our core business of banking. So how does banking help the economy, and how does it help the emerging markets? I have various examples. Let me give you two. One, SMEs. You've seen doubtlessly there's a lot of studies on how SMEs can create job creation and help economic growth. So last year we increased our lending to the SME sector by 9%. So we gave loans of about $19.2 billion to SMEs globally, especially in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. We also made a commitment with the UN to help SMEs with technical assistance and help grow their businesses in 5 countries. So we're currently expanding that program. The second area where it's sort of BAU but also sustainability embedded is financial inclusion. There are about 3 billion people in the world that lack access to financial services. They're either unbanked or they're underbanked. And so this has a major impact on our local economies, on economic potential, and indeed on our bottom line. We want to grow the pie so we can have a bigger pipeline of customers. So we did a few things to kind of help further the distribution of banking services. We have a specialized arm in our consumer bank that looks at Islamic banking. So we can help bank those that need banking that's Sharia compliant. We also have a specialized center for agricultural finance, and this helps farmers access finance. Farmers in a lot of places have been typically viewed as too risky, and so we've done some interesting products where we can offer farmers financing even if they don't have collateral. Like many banks in Africa, we've embraced the cell phone, so we can help reach those that live in rural populations or that face transportation challenges. And in Asia, we've launched a series of women-only branches, and this helps women overcome some of the cultural issues that they face when trying to access finance. So those are a couple of ways of how we're embedding sustainability in our daily BAU. The philosophy that drives the way we do business also drives our community investment. Basically, our community investment programs look to promote sustainable economic growth and development in our markets. We do lots of different things, ranging from HIV workforce education to encouraging employee volunteering. We give every member of staff 3 days paid to go and volunteer, and our goal this year is to do about 70,000 days of volunteering globally. The 2 programs I'd like to touch on very quickly in our community investment portfolio are Seeing is Believing and Goal. So Seeing is Believing is our flagship program on avoidable blindness. And you might think it's a really random thing for a bank to do. Why would we be involved in avoidable blindness? Well, in 2003, we were turning 150 years old, and our CEO, Mervyn Davies, at the time, sent out an email blast and said, look, we're turning 150. How should we celebrate? How should we give back? And a theme emerged among all the email responses. Staff member after staff member said, look, avoidable blindness and blindness are issues in our communities that are really affecting our customers, affecting our families, just affecting the community in general. So we started to do a little digging. And it turns out that 80% of blindness is actually avoidable. And 90% of that avoidable blindness is in our specific markets of Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. And because we're bankers, we started to do a little bit of cost-benefit analysis. We found that the annual cost of lost productivity because of avoidable blindness is about $200 billion a year. And by 2020, it's projected to be $300 billion. So there's huge economic cost to this issue. And yet the interventions themselves aren't actually that expensive. A cataract operation is about $30. A vitamin A treatment is about $1. So we decided that, hey, for 2003, our anniversary, we're going to do 1 cataract operation per member of staff. And at the time, it was about 30,000. Since then, the program's exploded. And last year, we were feeling very ambitious, so we decided we were going to raise $100 million for this program. We're at 52 million right now we've raised, and we've affected and touched about 25 million folks. So we're really excited about the program. Obviously, there's an emotional touch and tie to it. You know, when you see a child see their mother for the first time, it's pretty powerful. But what we're really proud about is the fact that there's true economic benefit and consequence. By helping somebody reverse their blindness or ensuring that they're never blind, you're ensuring that they get to go to school or that they get to go into the workforce. The last program I just want to mention very briefly is our program called GOAL. It's not news to you that girls and women in a lot of areas, especially in our markets, aren't full economic participants, and this obviously affects the economies they're in. So we decided we wanted to get involved in this space. So what we did is we created a program called GOAL. It is a sports for development program. Essentially, the girls ages 12 to 20 who are from low-income families in urban areas get to come and play a sport, whether it's netball or soccer. And once we have their attention, we start running them through a curriculum that's got 4 modules on financial literacy and banking, on health and hygiene, on communication skills, and on confidence and empowerment. We started the program in 2006 in Delhi, where we reached 70 girls. Last year, we reached 19,000. We're looking to reach 30,000 this year, and by the end of next year, we'll have reached a total of 100,000. We're in 5 different countries now: China, India, Jordan, Nigeria, Zambia, and Lebanon. And towards the end of this year, we will be in Ghana and Tanzania as well. As we've grown the program, we've realized that there's a need to address gender equality as well. So we're proud to announce that we are now engaging with an organization called Coaches Across Continents to pilot the inclusion of boys into these programs. And so we will start including boys in the pilots in Ghana and Tanzania later this year. So we're really proud that we've been able to scale the program so quickly, and that we've been able to scale and expand it, especially in a time of great economic instability globally. So I think I'll pause there and turn it back over to you.
Thanks very much indeed, Payal. That was fascinating. I mean, it's really interesting to hear what you're doing. And it's also interesting that, in a fairly obvious way, that does tie in with the bank's business.
Yeah.
I mean, this is obviously doing good, but you're presumably doing well as well in the process, to use a hackneyed phrase.
Yeah, we're in the 9th record year of profits, and this is during a global recession and when banks have been suffering quite significantly. If you look at our peer group,
That's one of the pluses of not being in the US or Western Europe during this period, right?
I know. It seems very strategic right now.
Yeah, right. It's not always quite so good, but you've been really lucky recently. Yeah, okay. Okay, so thanks very much indeed. That was great. So next I'd like to introduce you to Andrea, who's the Vice President of the MAC AIDS Fund. MAC, of course, is a major cosmetic company. And MAC actually has a very interesting relationship with AIDS and is very heavily involved in the sort of treatment of AIDS, the diagnosis and treatment of AIDS. And I'd like Andrea to tell us a little bit about the somewhat unusual business model that her fund has and its relationship to the parent company. Andrea.
Sure. Thanks so much, Professor, and I'm delighted to be here today and share a little bit about our business model. As Professor shared, I'm Vice President of the MAC AIDS Fund. We were actually founded by the original founders of MAC Cosmetics shortly after the company was founded in Canada in 1994. And really, the MAC AIDS Fund grew out of a very genuine response by the original founders of the company, one of whom was a makeup artist and the other a hairdresser. And they were at the time working primarily in the fashion industry and in movies and theater. And they saw in the early 90s really the HIV epidemic ravaging their peers and their loved ones in their community. And so they gathered with the original founders of the company, a very small group of 25 to 30 people, and thought about how they could possibly make an impact. And I think what probably at the time was not, how does a makeup company get involved in HIV, and what does it possibly have to do with HIV? It's not a pharmaceutical. It doesn't have products that necessarily logically lend themselves to helping in the fight against HIV and AIDS. And what I think was incredibly innovative at the time, back in '94, was that they came up with this model of selling a product. It's called Viva Glam. It's a line of lipstick products, which some of you may or may not know. Our first spokesperson in another very bold move was RuPaul. if you can recall the visual from way back in the early 90s. And what's really innovative, I think, about the business model to this day is that essentially it's 100% of the selling price of this particular line of lipstick products that's donated to the MacAIDS Fund. So in the US, that's $14.50, and all $14.50 goes to the MacAIDS Fund and is given away to support programs around the world. And the company underwrites the cost of goods and the production and marketing of the product itself. And so it's an incredibly generous model, and I think what is also really key to the success of the model is that essentially the MacAIDS Fund, the commitment to corporate social responsibility is one of the core pillars of the company, and one of the core pillars that we talk about in all our meetings of the brand equity. And at every single level of the company, in a way I've quite honestly never seen before, employees are incredibly engaged and supportive of the fund. So whether it's our makeup artists at counter who are selling the product, who are telling our customers about the impact of the work, whether it's our product development people who are actually picking the shades, or our senior leadership team who has stood firmly behind this 100% giving model for the last almost 20 years now. We just have incredible support and buy-in from across the company that feels deeply and believes very, very deeply in this cause. And so earlier this year, just a couple months ago at the International AIDS Conference, we were able to announce that we'd reached $250 million raised globally since the inception of the campaign back in 1994, of which we're very, very proud. And I think, this topic today for us is very timely and really speaks to the idea of this being an ecosystem approach. Given that we're working in public health and in HIV specifically, for MAC, it's incredibly important that we work in partnership, and we try to always work in partnership where possible. Whether it's with local NGOs, whether it's with other funders, we work very closely with a number of other funders, including a number of other corporations. We've partnered with Johnson & Johnson, with the Elton John AIDS Foundation, a number of other partners, and with national governments and national AIDS programs. And I think in our goals really to ensure at the country level that our programs and especially any pilot programs we're doing are sustainable, are scalable, and are integrated within the country's national AIDS plan and national goals. And so the way that we work essentially is that the sale of the Vivaglam product in any country is used to support local initiatives in that particular country for people in that community affected and infected with HIV and AIDS. And so, again, with the goal really being to ensure that our programs reach the most vulnerable populations, that they're getting at the key drivers of the epidemic, and that they're in keeping with the country's agenda and national AIDS plans. We always work in very close partnership and ensure that we're aware of the national AIDS plan, of the work and the involvement of other key stakeholders such as PEPFAR, the President's AIDS Program, UNAIDS, the World Health Organization, and other donors. And I want to just give two examples of sort of the way that we've gone about that. One of which is our program, one of our key programs in South Africa, which we started about 4 years ago in partnership with UNICEF and the National AIDS Program of South Africa. And essentially at the time, and similar I think to Payal's description there, in terms of the cost, mother-to-child transmission of HIV is an enormous issue in South Africa. It's relatively cost-effective to prevent the transmission, and the success rates of that are over 95% if mothers are given the correct medication at the correct time and adhere to the treatment guidelines within that period of time. And yet access was very, very low at the time to the medication and to the supportive services that were needed to ensure that women were able to actually adhere to this treatment and to prevent the spread of HIV to their baby. And part of the reason for that was that these services were primarily available at central HIV/AIDS clinics. And so one of the goals of the national government and of UNICEF and other partners was to develop a pilot program at the time it was one province, in which they could begin to decentralize these services and make them available at community clinics, so that when a woman went in for her primary health care at her community clinic that she could walk to and didn't need to spend a day taking a bus or trying to find transportation, she would have access to these services and that the staff would be trained to do so. And so we began that pilot in partnership with the national government and in partnership with UNICEF a number of years ago. It was expanded from the original one province across to, at the time, 9 provinces and essentially all of the country. So it has now become national policy of the country, and essentially all of those services are delivered now at the community level. So that's really one of the key ways in which we feel it's possible for us to ensure that we can have the biggest impact with our dollars, is to really be able to work in partnership at the local level with the key stakeholders. And I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Thanks very much. Thanks. That's really interesting. So is South Africa one of your biggest presences and one of your biggest successes, do you think?
From a philanthropic standpoint, it is one of our biggest presences. It is actually a relatively smaller market for us from the business, but that said, what we talk about is that in the MAC family of countries, it bears the disproportionate burden of the HIV epidemic. Over 5.6 million people infected, 1 in 6. And so for us at the MAC AIDS Fund, it's been a very large focus of our work. We've given away over $20 million in South Africa over the last 8 years. And so it's a major focus of our work because of the scale of the epidemic there.
And you said that you don't cross-subsidize the markets. I mean, the funds for South Africa come from sales in South Africa specifically, is that?
Some of our funds for our international work also come from sales in the United States because it is our largest market, but also in-market funds as well.
Okay. Thanks very much indeed. So Chris is the Director of Environmental and Health Initiatives at HP. I don't think I need to introduce HP to you. I guess everybody in this room at some point has owned or does own some piece of HP equipment. So they're obviously one of the giants of the IT field, and actually one of the oldest companies, I guess, in the IT field, along with IBM. You date back from the 1930s, right? Correct. Yes. So, and HP, of course, has a long and outstanding reputation for involvement in environmental and social problems. It goes right back to the company's founders. I'd like Chris to talk to us a little bit about the sort of his program's involvement with outside entities. In particular, I believe you've been heavily involved with the Clinton Initiative and a number of other groups like that. So if you could talk to us a bit about how that's worked out for you and why you get involved in these things.
Sure. Well, thank you, Professor Heel, and it's a pleasure to be here and able to talk with you guys. Can you hear me at the back of the room? Okay. No?
Is that one?
Try that one.
Yeah.
How's that? Is that better? Yeah, it sounds
Wide
better.
difference.
Yeah, it would figure that the technology guy gets the glitch, right? Anyway, thank you for that introduction, Professor Heel, because you're absolutely right. The context for this at HP is that this definitely goes back to the founders of the company. And in fact, I always like to open with a quote from David Packard, where he said that the betterment of society is not a job to be shared by the few, but it's a responsibility to be shared by us all. And so that philosophy really has carried through the company since its founding. Since 1957, social responsibility has figured at the center of the company's corporate strategy. So when you hear people talk about the HP way or the HP way now, as Meg Whitman likes to refer to it, it's something that really is built into the DNA of the organization. We've tried a number of different models to have social impact as an organization, and of course we worked through different models of philanthropy for a number of years, and those are highly effective in certain situations, and we continue to work in the philanthropic sphere when we can and when we need to, particularly in terms of things like disaster relief, and in terms of company matching of employee giving. So those are important planks of our overall CSR program. But as we've evolved the program in the years, the recent years, we've started to look at the concept and started to really develop the concept of creating shared value, of creating collaborative situations where HP technology and HP's people can help drive meaningful change and have a positive impact on social and environmental issues. In creating the program of social innovation around this concept of shared value, we looked at the Millennium Development Goals, and we focused in on two at first, education and health. In education, we focus on STEM plus education and entrepreneurship. And on health, we focus on providing access to health care, quality health care in parts of the world that don't have that. And I'll talk about an example of that in a minute. Increasingly, we're also bringing in the environmental sustainability parts of our team. We have a tremendous environmental sustainability distributed team within HP, but bringing them in terms of social innovation is also part of our plans. So when I talk about collaborative impact, I think probably it's best to actually just give a really clear example. There are a number of these in the programs of the Sustainability and Social Innovation team, but the one that I like to talk about is one that we created in collaboration with the Clinton Health Access Initiative, or CHI. And this is centered around the issue of early infant diagnosis of HIV. And so working with CHI, who have a tremendous appetite for what I like to call serial innovation. They go in and solve a major health problem, like the cost of antiretroviral drugs. They innovate around that program, and then they leave the market forces in place to help to drive the change further. We started talking with them a number of years ago about this issue of the time it takes between testing and diagnosis. So that's the key to the early infant diagnosis program that we developed with CHI. What did CHI bring to the table? Well, not only the identification of this issue, but also the contacts within the Kenya Ministry of Health. This is where we decided to begin the program. We also created a collaboration with CHI and with Strathmore University, which is a university in Nairobi. Strathmore added the creative power around the software and the ways of visualizing some of these issues. We added the cloud solutions. We also developed a special 3G-enabled printer in order to be able to get data back to the health clinics more quickly. And we worked with the Kenya Ministry of Health. Our team created a kind of convening function where we were able to bring in people from around HP, and particularly in our East Africa office, where the boots are on the ground to be able to put in place the technical solutions. And basically we were able to create from the ground up a program that speeded the time between testing and diagnosis on HIV in infants from days or even weeks in some cases to hours. And as a result of that, we've been able to test in Kenya 100,000 infants. We've taken the program also to Uganda in the last year, and we've already accelerated it and tested a further 50,000 infants there, thereby saving thousands of lives. Now, what's in it for HP? Besides the fact that this is core to the company's philosophy, besides the fact that it's one of our founding values, besides the fact that it also helps drive the company's reputation, I think that ought to be recognized as well. What we're doing is we're creating programs that demonstrate the power of technology to have an impact, a positive impact on people's lives. And so that's really what's at the core of this philosophy is, bring the power of our people and our technology to have that positive impact as a demonstration of the great potential there is for IT to really enable improvement as opposed to merely be a partner in efficiency. So I think early infant diagnosis is a great example. Just briefly, I think given the keynote address that we'll be hearing after this panel, it's also worth noting that we're working with Partners in Health on a program that they're doing in Haiti, which is to build a new hospital in Mirebalais, in the center of the country. And HP is a technology provider there as well. Again, a great demonstration of how not only can we use IT to help make the hospital more efficient, but also to connect it to the outside world. The Mirebalais Hospital is going to be a learning hospital. And so the more that it can be connected with teaching hospitals back here in the US or elsewhere in the world, the more that mission can be fulfilled. So I won't say too much more about that, but I think you get the idea. If you go to our corporate website, you can see a number of other examples of this positive impact that I'm talking about.
Great, thanks very much indeed. It's fascinating. Thank you all three of you for those great summaries of what you're up to. While the three of you were talking, I was listening carefully, and I realised there's a common theme to all of this, which is that all three of you are basically involved in providing the kinds of services that here in the US or in Western Europe we'd expect to be provided by governments, but through the social welfare programs and health programs, which are just not provided or not provided at all adequately in developing countries, and you're sort of supplementing what are otherwise rather inadequate government programs. I mean, is that Is that a growing theme in sort of CSR policies in developing countries? Do you think? I mean, are you do we just have 3 companies that happen to be in this area, or is that something which is an increasing element of Western CSR policies? Do you think?
Well, I'll take a first crack at that. I think that as I alluded, I think the idea that philanthropy is not as sustainable as creating shared value, as working with partners, as leaving a legacy of different ways of doing things. I think that's really one of the key drivers here. Getting significantly more impact for the dollars and the time invested is a real part of the idea that we're trying to pursue. And increasingly, I think also to enable the creation of ways of solving these issues that then can be transferred to other markets more easily. And I'd like to think that technology can play a role in that as well.
Yeah, I see. Yeah. Please.
I think for us, we would definitely say our role is working in partnership with national governments. And in fact, in the countries in which we work, many of the national governments have very robust HIV/AIDS programs, which are financed by their own health budget, as well as by donations from PEPFAR and Global Fund and other resources. And I think what private philanthropy can bring to the table often is the ability to move quickly to pilot or demonstrate a new type of program that the government can then bring to scale. And so I think it's very much a collaborative relationship and very much a complementary relationship.
So you're saying that to some extent you're the source of new ideas. And that's consistent with what Chris was saying too, because Chris was saying you're bringing in the technology which presumably the local government wouldn't have been doing.
I think sometimes it's new ideas, sometimes it's just our ability to move very quickly and flexibly. To say, that there's an idea that the national government, let's say of South Africa, would like to pilot, but we're able to move very, very quickly to do that in a way that perhaps a larger bureaucratic organization such as
a government
wouldn't be able to do.
Okay, point taken. Thanks. Payal.
Well, I think we're a little bit different in that we're relatively small in the Western world. We're about 1,200 in North and South America, and we're probably about 2,000 in Europe. So for us, it's not necessarily a trend of philanthropy. It's just by nature of where we are in the world, we address the problems that we see. And I think a lot of the issue in the developing world is that there just isn't that infrastructure. It's not necessarily that the governments aren't willing or wanting to do what they aren't doing. It's just that there isn't that the systematic infrastructure present. And so part of our job and part of what we see as our sustainability strategy is trying to help governments not only build that infrastructure for example, credit bureaus, or if it's health systems, but also push them a little farther than they might be willing to go without our advocacy, because obviously in some markets we're rather big, and so we have that benefit of being able to push governments a little bit into a more progressive direction.
I was also interested in the differences in the origins of your programs. And Payal, you said that your program basically came not from the founders, but from the members of the company, the employees of the company, on your 150th anniversary, that this idea of tackling avoidable blindness sort of emerged from the grassroots up, which is actually fascinating, I thought. Whereas in both your cases, the founders really set up not the details of your programs necessarily, but the founders were responsible for giving the company's direction. But is there with both Mac and with HP, I assume there's widespread buy-in for this amongst the employers, and it's seen as important to the employers. But could you comment on that?
Sure. For us, as I said initially, I've worked at other corporations. I've never really seen the level of mass buy-in across the entire company and love of the work and commitment to the work that there is at Mac. And I think part of that, ours was a bit of a hybrid. It was the founders of the company, but it was also the original employees that voted, essentially, and developed the program together. And I think because the Mac AIDS Fund and the Viva Glam campaign has been a part of the company since its inception, that it really is, we refer to it internally, and everyone refers to it internally as the heart and soul of the company. And it really is treated that way on a day-to-day basis. And I would say almost every employee some way touches the work of the fund, whether it's, again, our makeup artists who are selling the product, who could basically show our customers almost any lipstick product at the counter, and yet choose to talk about the Viva Glam campaign and the impact of the work and the difference that they can make by purchasing a Viva Glam. And so it's really an incredible, I would say, collective effort on the part of all of the employees across the company. And I think what we've also seen is a tremendous enthusiasm from our employees to get more involved in the work of the fund. And we actually have a week-long volunteer effort that we execute around World AIDS Day each year. We have last year we had over 2,000, I think close to 3,000 employees across 30 countries that were volunteering with our nonprofit partners during that week. Wow. And working with our local partners essentially to help them with various aspects of their programs and in many cases bring their artistic talents to bear, which was really great to see.
Great.
So.
Fascinating. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, when you think about the power of these programs, I touched earlier on things like reputation and maybe even business value. But I think, employee retention is an important one. And, increasingly, employees are expecting their companies to have active social programs that they can get involved in and where they can make a difference. One of the great things about working in the team that I do is that we have a number of folks in the company who are more than willing to volunteer their time. HP has been a leader for many years in allowing employees to take 1 hour per week of company time to do volunteer work. So that's 52 hours a year. But many employees go well beyond that. And in fact, we have a number of folks coming forward and actually kind of negotiating with their managers to be able to take some more of their time to do some pro bono work on our behalf. So it's kind of like it's a nice internal competition to be managing, and I think when other employees get to be able to see that and to see the impact that these programs have in the marketplace, it also creates additional demand to get involved. And so I think it's an important recruiting tool and an important retention tool.
So you're telling me basically that people are more and more taking their values into the workplace, and that you as corporations have in some sense to cater for that, and you find there's a real benefit to catering for that. It's interesting because that didn't used to happen. People used to leave their values at home in some sense when they went shopping or went to the workplace, but now we're shopping our values and we're working our values and we're even investing our values to some degree, and that's a big change. Let me ask you one more question, and then I'll turn it over to the audience. This is not an unfair question, but I mean, obviously your companies are very interesting examples of this. But if you had to pick, each of you had to pick one other company that you think is really interesting in terms of its CSR policies and perspectives, is there one? What would it be? You're welcome to say there isn't one, but I'd be interested to know what you think about that. Don't rush.
Yeah, well, I'll try to kick this off. I think when I've been surveying other companies and what they're doing, I think Walmart has done a lot of really interesting work, not only because of the size of the company and the fact that if they change all the light bulbs globally, that actually makes a huge difference, but they've really embraced the idea of supplier diversity, which is something I think we talk a lot about in the US and perhaps in Europe, but we don't talk a lot about in Latin America, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. And so not only committing to purchase X percentage of their corporate spend on, say, women entrepreneurs, but also help those entrepreneurs scale up so that they can actually be suppliers to major corporates. I think that's going to be a really great incentive for economic growth globally.
That's fascinating. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, one of the cool things about working in this space is that it's great to be able to sort of see what other companies are doing, and there's also a lot of fora where we can get together and kind of share the values that we have and some of the successes and also maybe some of the pitfalls. So there are a lot of companies that I admire. But one that comes to mind always first is Unilever. I mean, I think Unilever has got great clarity in terms of their mission. Their sustainable living plan is extremely simple and easy to understand. They've got 3 clear goals. There's a multiplicity of goals behind those, but their goals are to have their footprint in carbon, waste, and water. They're doing things in their supply chain that are quite far-reaching in terms of changing the ways that raw materials that they depend on, like palm oil and and other raw materials. Tea is another important part of their business, are being grown and sourced ethically. So they're, and I think one of the kind of key things I like about the Unilever approach is they've set themselves some very stretching goals, and they openly and readily admit that they don't know how they're going to get there. And they want to collaborate with others in order to figure it out. I think it's a very far-reaching and very leadership kind of a position that they've taken, driven not only by their CEO Paul Pullman, but by many of the employees who support him. So, I think they're a great model to build around.
Yeah, reinforcing them, and they're actually responsible for starting the Marine Stewardship Council on the whole sort of sustainable fisheries reporting system. Yeah, right. That's interesting. Yeah, great. Yeah. You want to say anything, Andrea?
Sure. I think, agreed, there are a number of companies whose work I tremendously admire. I think I'm probably most familiar with those who are working in the HIV/AIDS space and with whom we've partnered historically. And I think one of the companies that comes to mind for me is Levi Strauss, that has done a tremendous amount of work. And I think for me, what's most interesting and innovative about their work is the fact that they have really targeted a lot of their programs to the most vulnerable populations and populations for which it's not always necessarily particularly popular to be funding those kinds of programs, whether that be programs for sex workers or injection drug users in difficult settings. And really a very edgy and innovative approach, which I think is a philosophy that MAC very much shares. Yeah,
interesting. They've got a very interesting track record in a lot of ways. Yeah. Okay, so we've got about 23 minutes left. So we're going to use this taking questions from you guys. So please keep your questions brief. I know there's always a temptation to make a statement and then ask a question. Please just drop the first part and jump to the question. Okay. So lady here with the red shirt. We've got a mic travelling around. So could you? We picked on this lady.
Yes.
Here on the front row. Thanks.
Yeah, you talked a little bit about working with governments to help drive your issues or drive your sustainability efforts. Can you talk a little bit how you've worked with competitors? Because this is one issue where everyone can kind of get together and help out, but typically in business, especially I work in the chemical industry, there's pretty high competition out there. So how do you work with your competitors on this?
Well, I think in the competitive space, we have kind of worked more on environmental issues with competitors. So when you think about the issue of used electronic equipment, or e-waste, as it's more commonly known, that's one where critical mass is really important, to the collection and then the processing of those equipment. So, HP is the largest IT company. We have a lot of equipment out there, but we're by no means the majority of what's in the public space. So there are situations, there are markets in particular where it's important to work with even, a very close competitor like Dell. Never mind a company like maybe Sony that makes things that are sort of electronic, but they're not in any way like IT. Most of it. I mean, I know they do make some PCs. So it's kind of like, how do we kind of bring those forces together when there's a particular issue? I think there's an opportunity in social innovation to work, perhaps not always with competitors, but with other companies. I've been at a number of conferences where it's amazing. I'll be sitting on a panel like this, and I'll find out, something like what Andrea is describing that Mac's doing, which seems very associated with what we're doing. And why aren't we talking with each other more? If it's about HIV diagnosis in mothers and in infants, it seems like it's quite related. So maybe there's some kind of synergies that might be possible by working together. I mean, that there's a lot of writing in the press about this collaborative impact, and I think that's something that needs further exploration.
Similar to what Chris mentioned, sharing best practices across industries has been something that we've been doing quite regularly. So this, for example, in finance, is along the lines of the Equator Principles and the climate principles. How do you embed sustainability in the way you make loans to folks? So we not only helped establish the climate principles, but we also developed our own 14 position statements that guide our lending in risky areas like palm oil or metals and mining. In addition, similar to what Chris said, we not only work with competitors, but we work with other companies. There are things that other companies do better than what we do. So a big example is microfinance institutions. We don't have the ability to be on the ground. So what we do is we work with MFIs, we give them access to capital markets, we bank them, and we give them technical assistance so that they can actually go and be on the ground and disperse more loans than we would be able to out of our urban area branches.
Interesting.
Sure, and for us as well, I mean, we actually have a number of direct co-funding relationships with other corporations in which we're both investing in a particular project, whether that be a pilot project or a more ongoing effort. We're working in very close partnership around prevention of mother-to-child transmission with Johnson & Johnson in South Africa as one of our partners there. We have a public-private partnership around soccer-based HIV prevention intervention, also taking place in South Africa with Nike, with USAID, and a number of other partners there. And even within the fashion industry, work very closely with Kenneth Cole and others who are very committed and involved. So I think for us, we see ourselves really as sort of, one relatively small player in the effort to combat HIV and AIDS, and whenever possible, we work in partnership to ensure that our programs are sustainable and have broader support. So.
It's an interesting question. Actually, just one more comment on your question, which is that I believe when the Fair Labor Association was set up, which is an association of garment industry companies, they actually had to get an antitrust exemption from the regulators here in the US for some of their activities. And the Equator Principles were also very carefully structured to avoid impinging on antitrust issues here in the US again. So collaboration between competitors sounds like a great idea, but you actually do have to be legally quite careful, particularly in the US where the antitrust authorities are particularly aggressive. A gentleman over here. Yeah. But can you just get your mic to you?
Yeah, my name is Ariel, and this question goes directly to Andrea. I'm the president and founder of a nonprofit organization that deals with HIV prevention in local communities and here in New York. And my question is very simple. I feel tempted to, do a statement, but it's not the time. But
you're right. Thank you.
The question is particularly how the MAC AIDS Fund invest in capacity building, because it's important that you give money to nonprofit organizations, but the most important part is how you prepare the leaders of the communities to really move forward goals and objectives that are more in the ground and not at the corporate level. So if you can, any of you can give me an answer, that will be lovely, and not too long.
Sure, I could talk about that. And it's actually an interesting, is one example of the ways in which we invest in capacity building is actually an interesting example of a way in which we partner with another corporation. In that we actually have partnered with Johnson & Johnson. They have a management training program that they run for nonprofit leaders each year. And we've partnered with them to ensure that a number of our partners, that the heads of their organizations and senior leaderships of their organizations can actually enroll and participate in that management training program. So that's one example of a way in which we're also trying to build capacity and ensure the sustainability of our programs through developing leadership.
Interesting that non-profits need management skills. That's not widely known. But it's also interesting is that in the business school we're increasingly seeing people from the non-profit field coming for MBA training, and non-profit organisations are increasingly hiring people with the MBA skill set, which is an interesting development. Let's get some questions from the back. Lady with the green dress over there.
Good morning. Thank you for your time. I'm wondering if you can talk about how all these initiatives you're discussing are integrated into the organizational structure of your companies. Do employees have sustainability goals? Is it only at the senior leadership level? Is there a separate CSR department, or is it all in operations or supply chain or with the funding, just as some examples of the kind of sort of questions I'm looking for you to answer.
Who wants to kick off?
All right. Well, I'll start. HP is a big company. I mean, it's 300,000 or more employees, and we're in 170 countries. There are sustainability goals throughout the organization. We're blessed in the fact that we have hundreds of people who work in sustainability, ranging from marketing and product design through supply chain, and even in our operations. When you've got that many people, you've got over 700 offices around the world. So we have sustainability professionals in our global real estate organization as well. So, really, all of those goals ladder up into what the company reports annually in our Global Citizenship Report, which does a great job of representing the work of many people. So each of those people have distributed goals. And they are tasked with achieving those, whether it's the compliance of our products with local and global regulations, or it's doing responsible things in our supply chain. So it's a really highly distributed network. Now, at the top of that, my organization that I'm in is leading a corporate effort to pull those goals into a coherent strategy and representing that coherently externally as well. And so that's also part of the goals process, which gets shared with a global citizenship council. So the council reports ultimately into the executive council and also is responsible to the board of directors. So there are a number of ways, there are a number of points at which in the organization sustainability is monitored and tracked and measured. And then ultimately, different levels of responsibility depending on where those goals emanate from.
As I mentioned before, sustainability is sort of pervasive in our organization. So every single banker that works for us has to go through an environmental and social risk training. We do have a global sustainability team that drives our strategy, but markets are also given some flexibility on addressing issues that they see in their own markets. So I wouldn't say it's an isolated, siloed approach at all. It's quite global, and everyone's not only given training, but is given volunteer days. And similar to HP, we have a sustainability review that comes out yearly that showcases some of the examples and some of the work we've been striving for in addressing some of our targets.
Thanks.
And for us, it's quite similar as well. MAC is part of Estee Lauder, which has a corporate social responsibility committee, and philanthropy is one pillar within that, in which we rest. And many of the brands obviously have their own philanthropic endeavors as well as their own CSR efforts as well. But there is also very similar to, as Payal was mentioning, a sustainability report that comes out annually that talks about those efforts across all of Estee Lauder's brands.
Good. Yeah. Gentleman in this sort of light-colored shirt right next to you there.
Hi, thank you. It sounds like you're all doing great work. And what I want to ask is, what advice would you give to young professionals who are looking to transition towards a career in CSR, actually? And how did you get to the point that you're at today?
Okay, someone wants to get into your space. How do they do that career-wise? How did you guys get there? I mean, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your own backgrounds and how you got into this area.
Sure. Mine is a little bit of a non-traditional background, so I don't know that it will lend the greatest. Okay. I'm actually a clinical social worker originally by training, and spent a number of years working in hospitals and intensive care units counseling patients with terminal illness. I then sort of took a terrific U-turn, but didn't necessarily have a direct answer to your question in working in a healthcare consulting firm in Washington, overseeing their CSR, at which point I went back to business school, actually. So I think that piece, for me, around the intersection between nonprofit and CSR, and I think that business school was a great way to bridge that for me in terms of moving from direct practice into a management role. So you're in a good spot.
Yeah.
Well, I have a background in marketing and general management prior to coming to sustainability maybe about 4 or 5 years ago. The move to sustainability was a conscious one, and building on the business experience that I'd had previously. Because I think it helps, at least in my case, it helps for me to connect with the business units to be able to speak the same language as them. And it helps for me to have had the kind of role where I was in charge of creating strategies and communicating strategies about brands or about businesses. So, it doesn't mean that that's the only path to CSR. I do think that some commercial background is important. I think that if CSR is looked at in isolation, it is difficult to make those connections. And when I really think about what the value add that my team brings to the party, it's in that convening function. It's in being able to look across the organization and see where the connecting points are. When do we need to leverage experts from the business units or from HP Labs? How do we connect better with GRE, Global Real Estate? Sorry, at HP we talk in acronyms. Even the company's name is an acronym. So this is kind of the I think the connecting tissue is an important role, particularly at a corporate level in CSR that my team plays.
I started my career in the nonprofit space, and after a few years realized that I was really sick of fundraising for my salary every year. So decided to go and get an MBA to go switch to the private sector where there were more resources. After business school, I did some banking, some actual banking, as opposed to just working for a bank, and then hopped over to Standard Chartered, where I not only do a lot of our sustainability work, but I do all of our public affairs and advocacy with governments in both Washington and throughout Latin America. So I think mine's a little bit of an odd path as well. But I agree with Chris that you have to understand the business to be able to employ a sustainability or CSR approach, because you have to pitch it to the business, and if they don't see what the bottom line implication is for them, they have no interest in it at all.
Right. So the bottom line is you're looking for people with some corporate background but a strong passion for the social environmental dimension that you're trying to get, which is, I guess it's an increasingly common combination. And we'd like to think we're turning out a lot of them here. Anyway. So I think we've probably got time for one more question. Lady here.
I have one too, but it was actually another.
Can we get the mic, please? Thanks.
Yes, I'm Ellen Riley, a graduate from Columbia, and two questions actually, but you can choose to answer one. The first one is, I was at another seminar where head of a large advertising, a chairman of an advertising firm, said during the downturn, corporations lost roughly, I don't know what percentage of their brand value. Just due generally to the banking challenges, all corporations were affected. And so that particular aspect within the United States and around the world, how much do you work in that understanding of brand value in the corporate structure and your impact of trying to stabilize that, increase it, or counter it when it has hits, if you will? So how much are you in interplay with that? The second question is, in the United States, I find the nonprofit world so scattered, and the philanthropic pieces, it's better recently, but it's also larger and more diverse in its focus. This issue of shared value structures, what are we doing in the United States?
Who wants to tackle those? Chris is going to lead off, right?
Well, as the marketer at the table, I'll take a stab at the brand value question. I mean, it really is a tough metric to measure consistently and with any kind of certitude. But we do know that there's a correlation between the work that we do in global citizenship and CSR and the company's reputation. We have done some surveys where we've looked at this on a global basis, and this is an important caveat, after price and product features, it's the number one differentiator with our customers. So that's pretty cool and a good lever for us when we're talking internally But can I translate a specific action to a specific impact on brand value? That's a little harder to do. So it's kind of a question that gets raised frequently in my role. You know, we're spending additional money, say, on assuring our environmental data that are going into our global citizenship report. What's the return on investment? Well, if it keeps HP on the lists of the CDP Leadership Index or the DJSI World Index, I think it's a pretty good thing. But can I literally tie that back to brand value or not? That's difficult. I think it's a kind of age-old problem, but it's definitely one that we need to be aware of in these roles because, as I mentioned earlier, reputation is one of the benefits of the work that we do.
I think similarly, we couldn't necessarily tell you what part of our brand value is directly correlated to our sustainability work, but I think there are two things I'd mention. One, our sustainability work is great for our recruitment. So when we look and survey all new hires, one of the top 3 reasons they've joined the bank is because of the programs that we implement in our communities. The other is that, you know, banks have not been that positively affected in the last few years, and banks generally have really suffered from a reputational hit. So I think doing the things that we're doing helps us survive in a time of great economic instability and various scandals breaking out.
And I think likewise for us, it would be hard to say exactly sort of how the Viva Glam campaign specifically contributes in terms of brand value, but I think what we do know is the tremendous success of the campaign and the incredible loyalty and enthusiasm of our customers for the Viva Glam campaign. And you know, last year we raised $30 million globally, which was, you know, for us, our sales have continued to increase. We've continued to see incredible support for the campaign and somewhat unprecedented support for the campaign over the last several years. So I think that gives us a very good gauge in terms of the level of enthusiasm of our consumers for the campaign and for the work that we do to support HIV/AIDS programs. And similarly, I think we've done a lot of surveys with our staff around their involvement in our volunteer efforts and seen that they have really said that being able to work at MAC and engage in the volunteer activities and be a part of that really helps them feel that they work at a company that shares their values, which I think is really important.
I'll just add one remark on this point, which is there's actually now quite a number of academic studies that show that there is a significant correlation, and quite a persistent correlation, between measures of corporate social responsibility, you know, as measured by people like KLD and Innovest and these other sort of CSR rating agencies, and stock market valuation. And you know, stock market valuation is higher, presumably means your brand value is higher because that's what the stock market is interested in. So that's a sort of indirect way of getting some evidence on the CSR brand value issue. Okay, folks, well, we're actually out of time at this point. It's gone very quickly, but I'd like to thank our panelists for a rare combination of personal commitment I'd also actually like to thank the real organisers. I'm sitting here kind of getting the PR from this, but I did nothing to organise this. The organisers were Dana Edelstein and Dana Rosenberg. Thank you.